There we go. All right. Hello, my name is Karen Dixon, and I am the Economic Development Manager for the Lower Colorado River Authority in Austin, Texas. And I am the chair of the SEDC Education Committee. I want to welcome you for the first in the SEDC webinar series, Strategies for Success. In the coming months, SEDC will be hosting 3 webinars covering 3 topics: marketing and communication, business retention and expansion, and workforce. Today's webinar, Marketing and Communication, is the first in the series. These sessions will include a facilitated conversation led by a moderator with 3 or so panelists. What makes this webinar series unique from others is that after the panel discussion, participants will then be led into breakout rooms by community size: large urban, mid-sized suburban, and small community rural. Each breakout room will be led by one of the panelists for interactive Q&A and further discussion around best practices. Our goal for today's webinar is that each of you will get at least one takeaway that can be implemented in your community or organization to impact or advance your marketing and communication strategies. But before we get started, I want to ask our co-chair of the 75th Anniversary Committee, Mr. Bob Leake, to share with you information about our upcoming annual conference in August, along with activities around our 75th anniversary. So take it away, Bob.
Great, Karen, thank you very much, and welcome everybody to today's seminar. And I won't take too much of your time, but I do want to say that we are all really excited about the upcoming conference in Tampa on August 15th through the 17th. It's going to be a great opportunity for all of us to kind of come out of hiding and get back together and share, collectively, what's been going on this past year of the pandemic. The conference theme is resilience. I can't actually think of a better theme as we come out of 2020. But my role today is simply to say, please register to attend that conference and bring a colleague with you, because as part of the conference and really ongoing throughout the rest of this year, we are celebrating the 75th anniversary of the founding of SEDC. Seems remarkable that we've been around for 75 years. And I do believe that we're going to be around for 75 and maybe even many, many more beyond that. We're excited about what's coming up for 75th. Start looking at your electronic newsletters and other forms of social media as we promote the 75th anniversary. I would ask that those of you that have a little extra money in your budget, we would love to have a few more sponsorships specifically for the 75th anniversary celebration. We plan to have several events ongoing during the conference, but then also throughout the year, we are going to have some other things to commemorate our 75 years. We have a couple of really neat giveaways and kind of historic perspectives that we're putting together that we're going to share with all of our members. And so we are really, really excited. So make plans to join us in Tampa. I hope you all have a wonderful, wonderful seminar today. And I thank you very much for the opportunity to have a few minutes, Karen.
All right. Thank you, Bob. I hope that each of you will join us in Tampa. It's going to be fun. Now, I would like to introduce today's session moderator, Ms. Ashley Llewellyn. Ashley serves as the Director of Strategic Initiatives for St. Tammany Corporation. She has served St. Tammany since June of 2013. And in her current role, she leads various initiatives, programs, and projects for St. Tammany's Economic Development Strategic Plan. She's very involved in our profession and her community and is recipient of many well-deserved honors. Ashley also serves on the SEDC Education Committee. And I will say that she was the creative and driving force in the establishment of this webinar series, and I thank her for taking on this initiative in addition to her many other duties. So with that, Ashley, I will turn it over to you.
Good afternoon, and thank you, Karen. And Bob, thank you so much for giving us a little insight into the 75th anniversary of this awesome organization. We're looking forward to what's to come next. So as Karen shared, this is kind of a new little series for us. And so we're so glad that you've joined us today for Strategies for Success, which is our 3-part webinar series, kicking off with today's event, Curating Economic Development, Marketing, and Communications Efforts. Sharing your community's competitive advantages for business development and positioning your organization as the trusted resource for your local stakeholders are constant and ever-evolving efforts for us as economic development professionals. We appreciate each of you taking the time to join our panel of experienced professionals in economic development, marketing, and communications to finesse your organization's engagement strategies and learn tips to share the best of your community's story, whether that's to your local partners, industry prospects, or even your social media followers. This webinar really does aim to share best practices and foster conversation amongst participants in breakout room discussions and provide implementable takeaways relevant to the needs of your specific organization and community. So for the first half of our time together, we'll have a facilitated discussion with our panelists, sharing about the strategy of determining and developing your message. The second half of our time together will be held in breakout rooms by community type, really discussing the tactics for implementing and sharing your message. So I am not an expert in marketing and communications, but our panelists are. So let's take a few minutes to meet them. Joining us first up is Michelle Stark. Michelle is the Vice President of Sales and Marketing at Red Sage Online. Next up is Colleen Walton. Colleen serves as the Vice President of Brand Acceleration, Inc. And Andrea Atkins Hutchins is the Vice President of Economic Development and Community Resiliency at Thomas P. Miller and Associates. So I'd love for you guys to kind of kick off and share in your own words who you are, what you do, and how you spend your time within your organization and within the economic development profession. So Michelle, I'm going to have you kick us off.
Okay, well, first of all, I'd like to say hello to everyone on this webinar. We're so excited to be a part of this. My name is Michelle Stark, and I am the Vice President of Sales and Marketing at Red Sage Communications. We are a full-service integrated communications agency headquartered in Northern Alabama, but we serve clients all across the southeastern United States and increasingly, across the country. One of our, big focus areas at Red Sage is figuring out how not just to do sort of that primary brand development and tell a story, really help communities understand what their unique, authentic story is all about, but then how do they move that forward through the many diverse communications and marketing channels available nowadays, social media, earned media, owned media. There are so many different strategies that can be employed. It's overwhelming, for small communities, big communities. A common thread is that people start to really feel like, wow, I could be spending money in a lot of different ways, and I have no idea how to put my budget to good use. So one of the things that we really try to do is come in as a partner and help our EDAs, EDOs, all of our partners figure out how can we really leverage the budget they do have and align that to their goals. We specialize, with not just economic development organizations specifically, but we also work with a lot of chambers of commerce, even some travel and tourism organizations. And really that gives us a broad view of how that shapes up. So many communities have a lot of diversity in terms of what their key drivers are, whether it's industry or retail, or they have a mix where they may, really be recreation based. So we have a really great sort of holistic view of what some communities are looking at, and we just love what we do. We have a great team and have been in the economic development space for over 16 years now, and just love participating with organizations like SEDC, which I'm just going to put in a plug for SEDC. It's a great organization. If you are not already taking advantage of sort of the wide range of offerings that SEDC has, please do so beyond just, webinars. there are so many great events year round and ways to connect with other professionals. So I'll just say, if you're not already fully embedded, there are so many great things to learn. And, Matthew, I'm sure will be more than happy to give you a rundown of all the great things that you can take advantage of with SEDC. But I'm excited to be here and really excited to hear about your challenges and try to give you guys some helpful tips.
Thank you, Michelle. Colleen, how about you share a little bit about yourself?
So I'm Colleen Walton. I am Vice President and Marketing Strategist of Brand Acceleration. Brand Acceleration is a full service ad agency that specializes in economic development. So we work exclusively with cities, counties, regions, and multi-county regions across the country. I am based in Tampa, Florida. So when you're here for the conference, if you need restaurant recommendations, let me know. It'll be nice to be able to stay at home and not have to stay in a hotel to go to that. But I oversee a territory that is the 17 states of the SEDC region. So I have a pretty wide footprint, but we are a nationwide company. Our real niche is kind of seeing ourselves as a marketing department for hire. So we work primarily with kind of small and mid-sized counties and regions who maybe can't afford a full marketing department, or they have a marketing person but need some more guidance. So we come in as a marketing department for hire. So any marketing piece that you need, any strategy you need done, that's what our role is. So in my role as a marketing strategist, I come into a community, essentially do a site visit like a site selector does. So I meet with educators, employers, utility providers, elected officials, residents, all of that, gather a ton of information, and then essentially go to the community and say, here's what I think your strengths are with regards to your target industry. And then here's how we convert that into a marketing strategy and a marketing message. So I'm really excited to be here. I'm glad that we're doing something like this where everybody gets to kind of have information relevant to their community size. I'm excited to see this.
Thank you so much for being with us, Colleen, and for being the one to suggest that approach. Colleen brought that up in an initial conversation, and so we're excited to see that brought to fruition today. And Andrea, share with us a little bit about you.
Hi, yes. So Colleen, before I get into my introduction, you should make us reservations for Burns Steakhouse. That would be phenomenal.
Oh, I can't. I can walk there from my apartment.
Oh my gosh, I'm so jealous, so jealous. Best restaurant ever. So yeah, so hi, I'm Andrea Hutchins. I'm with obviously Thomas P. Miller and Associates. So we are a 32-year-old workforce development, economic development, and education community development organization. So basically what that means is we work with just about any entity that is involved in community development in one shape or another. So whether that means creating economic development strategies or strategic plans, marketing plans, branding, communications, the whole nine yards, we pretty much do it all. We've done work in about 40 states throughout the country. And then myself, just a little bit of background on myself. So besides what you all can see in the information that was shared, I do just have to say, I used to be an economic development practitioner on the ground working for the government myself, and had to be there struggling with minimal or no budget. And so I'm really excited to kind of talk about some of the unique and very low budget ways that you all, even as economic development organizations who maybe don't work directly for a community, can take advantage of some of the things that we're going to talk about. So back in 2007, I used to be a director of a regional magazine organization, and was at the same time a chamber president. And so had the opportunity to kind of cheat there just a little bit, and took some of the things that I learned there and started implementing them when I became the economic development director for that same community. So a little bit inside baseball there that I'd love to share with our group when we break out. So just really excited to be here today, and thank you so much for having us all on, Ashley.
Thank you all so much for being here. So let's dive right into that discussion. So many people want to go straight to discussing the tactics. So when they decide that they want to launch a marketing campaign or really get into the marketing game, the first question they often ask is, well, which marketing piece do I want to make? And a core principle of our conversations amongst the four of us in preparation for today's workshop was really this foundational element of really needing to understand your community and sharing kind of with you all here today. How do you determine the best next step, that best course of action for your community? So Colleen, I'd love for you to kick off our conversation with your thoughts on a common question that we've all faced. How do I determine my story and my community's story?
Yeah, and I think that's a great place to start because, like you said, a lot of people, we're all marketers. People come to us and they say, I want to make a brochure or I want to do a video. What should I say in it? And my response is always, well, you should already know what you want to say. You should already have those talking points and that story. And so I think before we ever get into the conversation of tactics, you have to have that conversation of what is my story? So the process for that, I'm going to say it's simple in that there's not a lot of steps to it, but it is something that takes a lot of thought and a lot of conversation. But it's something you can sit down with your team and really hash that out and figure out on your own. But the first thing you need to do is determine what your objectives are as an organization. Are you focusing on business attraction? Are you focusing on talent attraction? Are you doing both? If it is business attraction, what types of businesses? Are you doing manufacturing? Are you doing office? Are you doing tech, medical, all of that? If you're doing talent attraction, are they doing office jobs? Are they doing manufacturing jobs? Are they working from home or are they working in an establishment? There's a lot to that. So really getting into the specifics, what am I trying to accomplish here? Then who is the audience for that? So if you're trying to do business attraction, is it site selectors and C-suite executives? Is it small business owners and potential entrepreneurs that live in your community? If it's talent, do they live just outside of your community? Do they live in other states? So you have to get really specific into who those audiences are. So then the next question after that is what information do those audiences need? If it's business, if it's site selectors, they're looking for available sites and buildings, transportation assets, workforce training and education related to those target industries. It's going to be utilities, it's cost of doing business, all of those assets that speak to the thing you're trying to accomplish. If it's talent, it's life. What is it like to live there? It's available jobs, it's housing, it's cost of living, it's schools, but not from the same standpoint as workforce training and education. It's more, if I move to the community to take a job and I bring my family with me, are my kids going to like the school that they go to? And are they going to get a good education? So that right there is the message. What am I trying to tell people about my community? So it's my assets that I'm communicating to them. And then that helps you decide the tactics. So what is the best medium for talking about those assets? And then what is the best channel to get it to my audience? So if I'm doing cost of business and I want to talk about cost of business for manufacturing, maybe that's better served in a brochure because it's numbers, it's charts, it's data that's better served as something that somebody can actually look at and read. But if it's life, maybe that's better in a video that I can share to social media. It's going to reach the audience I'm going to. I can show video of kids at the playground, people at a farmer's market, young people at a coffee shop. It can show that in a better medium than something that you read. So the idea is that you, at the end, kind of work backward. What is the best method for talking about my assets to this audience to accomplish this objective? And so this is a touchstone for all of the marketing pieces that you do from now on. So when you sit down and say, I want to send out an emailer, you just pull from this strategy that you already have developed. Okay, I'm going to do an emailer. I want to send it to site selectors in the plastics industry. So I'm going to talk about X, Y, and Z in that emailer. And then you just have to execute it. Or it says, or you say like, I want to do social media posts to do small business. Okay, so I'm going to talk about the traffic downtown. I'm going to talk about support for small business. I'm going to kind of showcase small businesses they already have. So you should already have that message established. So when it comes to actually doing the tangible marketing, you're not starting with a blank sheet of paper. You're just pulling from something that already exists. And I don't want to make it sound like I'm talking about SEDC just because we're on an SEDC call, but I think something that SEDC does really well that everybody can learn from is cohesive marketing. Every piece that I get from SEDC, whether it's a brochure about a conference, it's an email, it's a social media post, I can tell immediately it's SEDC. They have a consistent look, they have consistent language, and it immediately tells me this is SEDC. And that's how all of your marketing pieces should be. Your website, your emails, your social media, your phone calls, everything you do should have the same tone and the same look and feel that you've already established, that you just pull from in the future. And so, like I said, I know that sounds like an oversimplification, and it's annoying when people are like, oh, it's just so easy to do this. But it really is that foundational piece that you just have to sit down and do.
Well, and I love that piece of you just have to sit down and do. And I think sometimes for all of us, it's so much about ideation, and then the implementation is a little bit stickier. Michelle, I'd love to hear your thoughts, and then Andrea as well.
Sure. Well, I'll agree definitely with Colleen's points. I think that having that thoughtful internal discussion about your objectives and your audiences is huge, because if you don't know who you're speaking to, you can't easily determine the right messages, the right mediums. One thing, though, that wasn't hit on when we think about going back to the question about how do you determine your story as a community, it's really easy to get lost in the mix. There are so many communities out there, whether you're an individual, municipality, or a county, or a regional cooperative. You are competing so fiercely in today's modern age, not just with regional competitors, but globally. So how do you actually tell a story that truly stands out and represents the authentic nature of your community? What makes you special? So something that you might take into account as you're thinking about these questions internally, whether you're partnered with an outside agency or a collaborator, or whether you're just doing this kind of reflection internally, is what makes us different? The differentiators piece is so critical. And sometimes it can be very difficult to get this piece. Sometimes it's really obvious, right? We all know, cities like New Orleans, what are they known for? Sometimes it's so obvious, legacy communities where certain industries have been dominant for a long time. Those are the low-hanging fruits, we kind of say. You have a good sort of starting point. But when you get down, especially into the mid-size and smaller communities, it can be difficult to really take a step back and say, why are we different? Sure, we have, a couple of key interstates, bisecting our community, or we have water access, but what truly at the heartbeat of this community is different than any other community? And how can we leverage that forward into an identity that makes people really sit up and take notice beyond some of the, sort of more generic, common, value offerings that might be out there, like, oh, we have a low cost of living, especially in the Southeast, or, oh, we have an easy commute time. Those are great, and those should absolutely be incorporated. But we really try to get one level deeper than that. And what is, are the people, is there something about the people and the fabric of the society that's interesting or different? Is it an artistic community where just that entrepreneurial nature seems to just live, right? How can we really tap into that? So, definitely agree with everything Colleen put forward as some really good sort of thought work about how do you start thinking about translating a brand. But I would just, encourage you guys to think about, who are you? What makes you different? And from a tactical perspective, in terms of how do you figure out that story, you can use focus groups, you can use surveys, you can gather groups of stakeholders. We always encourage kind of a good mix of people who are politically or civically involved, as well as those who are leaders of industry. And then also thinking about your just everyday people, right? When you're community, what do people think of this community? What do they say? If they were going to visit your town on the weekend, what would they walk away saying? So kind of giving that mix, giving that sort of categorization can really go a long way sometimes to getting to a truly strong, more unique identity and sense of self.
I think just to kind of follow up on what you're talking about, I think something that's important, particularly for smaller rural communities where they may not have a unique thing. I don't want people to get discouraged in that, like, oh, I'm just really similar to the counties around me. You know, we're all the same distance from the airport. We all have like the same interstate that runs through here. How do I differentiate myself from them? Sometimes the differentiating factor is the marketing. So if you and your neighboring communities are really similar, but you're marketing and they're not, you're getting your story out there, and that's going to help you get traction. So I do think it's important if you have a differentiating factor to talk about it, but I don't want you to get discouraged if you don't feel like you have something unique about you. There's a quote that I always reference. It's a Dolly Parton quote where it's like, be who you like, find out who you are and do it on purpose. So if you just figure out what your community has and be the best at that and tell people about it, it's okay if you aren't New Orleans and you're not Austin and you don't have this super unique identity. I think just being the best version of yourself and telling people that that's what you have and that's what you are can be a strong differentiating factor for you.
Absolutely. And Andrea, I think this kind of lends well into the next kind of piece of the conversation I'd love to talk about is I'd love to hear your perspectives on different communications outlets and channels, specifically those more traditional media outlets, for really adding value and gaining credibility for a community and for an organization.
Sure. So first of all, I just want to say, since we're going to be doing a larger outreach, or not outreach, but breakout session, if you will, and I'm going to be hosting and facilitating for some of the larger communities, I think I'm going to speak just a little bit to those smaller and more rural communities that we were just touching on. So obviously, many smaller communities and rural communities don't have a giant marketing budget. They don't have, dozens of staff members or whatnot, on staff who can write articles and who can, do some graphic design where you just plop in advertising in the local newspaper, so there's a lot more of the, creative take that you have to take. And so unfortunately, right now across the country, newspapers are really hurting. I can give you, for instance, The Hill, their page views are down 70% since mid-January. And a lot of that is because of politics, because of COVID, because of a number of things, but communities can take advantage of that. Right now, at a time where 1 in 3 newspapers has closed, local newspapers have closed across the country, many of their staff members and their overall staff, they're just stretched really thin. So having to choose between whether or not to cover maybe a city council meeting where an economic development topic comes up versus some other, local story that might have a little bit more pizzazz or splash, you can certainly help form those relationships with the local community newspaper or the one that's most nearby and kind of be that bridge, right? Like help out with their staff and provide them with some articles and some quotes and get in there and kind of get in the weeds with them and for them. And if you don't have a local newspaper, many regional organizations do spotlights on communities who are lacking in those areas. So volunteer to, write a column once a month and kind of, give some updates on what's going on in your community. I know that a lot of economic development organizations also have newsletters that they use. You can repurpose that newsletter not only for an email, but you can also put that into a blog. You can, put that into some sort of an op-ed or a local column or something to that effect. But right now, unfortunately, we're at a time, like I said, where the media is really hurting. And so I think taking advantage, unfortunately, of that need that they have is a real opportunity. So.
And again, that's one of those things that we don't always think of top of mind from that economic development practitioner perspective. And so I love hearing these things. I've been jotting notes. Colleen and Michelle, any other kind of things that you have off the top of your head where you think, wow, this is really kind of an untapped resource or maybe an overlooked tool that's available for our colleagues?
Yeah, I think one thing I would definitely encourage is just leveraging partnerships. You know, people really sometimes overlook the strength of their existing networks. You know, it's almost taking the social media philosophy and applying it to all these other areas. You know, if you have educational partners, if you have workforce development partners, you know, local schools, colleges, nonprofits, you know, who are invested in seeing the community grow and thrive. It's amazing what people will do if you just take a moment to ask and if you make it easy for them, right? So if you've done the hard work and you've sort of put together the messaging and sort of go to that partner and say, hey, this is an initiative we're working on. We really want your help because we know that if we can do this, it's going to benefit everyone. You know, the rising tide lifts all boats. So I definitely would encourage you guys to think about, not on the communication side, you know, it's when we think about really getting more out of a budget, the more you can amplify, the better. And so if that's leaning into media contacts or media coverage, that's great. And that's one piece of it. But don't be afraid to go to those partners, you know, other cities, anyone that you can think of. Like we said earlier, you know, leaders of industry. We've really found that to be very effective, that sort of outreach and synergy piece. How can we help our economic development partners really take advantage of their existing relationships to help get the word out?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and
and you see this sometimes not just in the promotion and publicity, and marketing around a brand, but also just in the in active recruitment activities. So if you're trying to bring in, say, a specific industry, you know, you're going after that Amazon warehouse, whatever it might be, really being proactive about bringing all those partners together and letting them utilize their communication teams on your behalf. You know, that's kind of the holy grail where you really start to see that amplification take hold. So just something to think about too. It's not always on just the general ongoing promotion, but for specialty initiatives where you might really be trying to bring in, you know, a particular get, if you will.
And I think the key when you're asking other stakeholders, whether it's educators or employers or anybody to participate in something with you, the key is specificity. So when you're asking them to do something for you and you want them to actually do it, it can't be really time consuming and they shouldn't have to put a lot of thought into it. So if you are going to your employers and saying, hey, I want to do an employer spotlight on social media, can you record a 30-second or a 60-second video for me where you talk about X, Y, and Z? Or if you want your local community college, it's like, hey, can you send me 5 pictures from inside like your welding and industrial maintenance program? Like, be really specific. Don't say, hey, can you just record a video for me and, you know, talk about how great it is to be here? You have to give them those talking points that serve the marketing strategy. It's like, whatever your assets are, ask them to talk about those things. And they're more likely, because it's like, oh yeah, I can do a 60-second video and I can talk about these things. But if you send an email, it's just like, hey, whenever you get around to it, can you do this for me? They're less likely to participate in that.
I even love that specificity on the deadline. I think because all of us, it's so hard sometimes to discern what are those timelines and deadlines. And so really articulating that clearly, also make sure that it gets flagged in their email inbox, or that staff member who's assisting with that project says, oh, we have to do this before we wrap up the business day today. So I love that concept. I think it's really important. And Michelle, is there also some opportunity where we're leveraging this synergy, we're really amplifying these messages? Does that kind of put us in a situation where we may be able to maximize some of those earned media opportunities, or really look towards that kind of a strategy as well?
Yeah, absolutely. And just a little background for people who aren't from a communications role, you know, some kind of communications terminology 101. There's earned media, paid media, and owned media. You sometimes hear those categorizations. Earned media is really just placement, sort of that traditional PR that you might expect, you know, getting news coverage of a particular event. paid media, obviously placement through other activities, and then the owned media piece where you see, people with their own landing page or website, for example, that is geared toward, specific initiative or something they're looking to promote proactively. So just to make sure we're all on the same page, when we say earned media, we're really leading into that media coverage space. And, when you think about media networks and media channels, especially over the last few decades, my background is originally from a media and journalism world. When we think about consolidation and how modern media networks, as Andrea rightly pointed out, have really contracted just with economic pressures and changes in market dynamics. If you can get good, solid coverage and start building some good foundational relationships with your local media partners, in particular television news, but also in some of the remaining print shops that are still open and operational. If you can develop those good partnerships, most of them, there are opportunities for them to just amplify your story from within, right? So there's a lot of recycling. You guys have probably noticed that, in content. If a local outlet picks something up or regional, it's just that much more likely nowadays that you may get some national coverage from that as well. Now, with a lot of our clients, we do take a very layered approach, because we will sometimes be targeting specific national publications for certain priorities or promotional activities, depending on what we're actually looking to get out there. So sometimes you want to be taking the step of really targeting nationally and also locally. But I would say, again, low-hanging fruit, right? For the majority of communities here and individuals on the call with us today, just be thinking about just even getting your local hometown media outlets invested in what y'all are doing. There is always a hunger for those kinds of economic development and growth stories. Truly, it's an easy way to really get some coverage and visibility and community buy-in as well.
So Andrea, how do we take these things and really sell them to our boards, whether these are a volunteer board, a board of elected officials, because sometimes it can be a little nebulous to talk about marketing and communication. So how do we, as those professionals, when we're in front of those boards or those commissions, how do we really position this to show that it has real value and opportunity for economic development and for the community?
For sure. So, obviously there's the traditional way to go, which is, analytics, right? The numbers don't lie. But when you're building a media or a marketing campaign or a combination thereof, sometimes at the very beginning, there's just not a whole lot of meat there. There's not a lot of story to tell. If you're trying to get an organization to, increase your budget or spend money in an area where they haven't normally, marketing is often a really hard sell because it really takes a while to show a payoff. And especially when we're talking about traditional media, that's really the long game, right? An earned media strategy takes a lot of time to get into effect, but obviously there's a huge payoff there. So I would say my most successful efforts have been when I get those individuals who might be on my board or those local elected officials, when I get them involved and I get them in the spotlight. Who doesn't love to be in the spotlight and be quoted? So, earlier there, when I was talking about, the earned media strategy or even in paid media strategy, getting quotes from individuals, somehow they always seem to find money to pay for those type of things. So it's a great thing, especially for elected officials, if you can kind of get them out there and get them in front. And then, when we look at return on investment, paid or even earned media strategy, it sticks around for a while and you can utilize those stories, those articles and that coverage in multiple different ways. So I really think showing the value of your particular strategy and how it's not just a one and done when it comes to any marketing effort, but how that's going to, again, play out in the long game. I think it's much harder to say no to. So.
Definitely. Colleen or Michelle, anything to kind of share there as well?
No, I had a note here that said basically like to get your stakeholders involved. But kind of tying back to what we were saying before, it's like if you are going to get them involved, making sure that they are up to date on the talking points and they're saying things that are consistent with what you're wanting to say. I've done a lot of site visits where I've gone in and talked to elected officials. and I ask them questions, and the things that they tell me are not what the economic developer said. They talk about different target industries. I was working with a community recently where I had to clarify the name of the industrial park because 3 different people told me 3 different names. So if you're going to put somebody out there, make sure that what they're saying is on message and that they get what they're there to do. But I think that's how you get that buy-in. I think everybody likes their ego stroked. So if you can say, hey, we're going to do this earned media campaign, would you like to be interviewed? Then, like Andrea said, suddenly they have the money for it.
And I would definitely, Ashley, agree with Andrea and Colleen. Those are excellent points. And I'll just say too, from a stakeholder buy-in perspective, something that we try really hard at Red Sage to do, a lot of our partners are coming to us and they have a vision, right? Like they're the one on their team that has this vision of, I want to do this. Like I've seen this happen in this community. So I think as a partner, if you are looking, especially to outside help, one of the things we always try to do is, let's help you paint the roadmap, right? Let's really break it down and paint that vision down. And let's talk real numbers about, what could we do in terms of a tiered strategy for investment? Can we take it in phases, right? Can we do some foundational things that will work within the budget we have now, but show enough momentum to where we can get more buy-in and potentially free up more funds to really accelerate to that next level. So I think, from Red Sage's perspective, and I know me personally in some of the initiatives I've been involved with, I'm part of the mentorship program at the Hudson Alpha Institute for Biotechnology, which is based in Huntsville. And one of the things that we do as part of the Navigate program, which is modeled off an MIT model for how they engage entrepreneurship and biotech startups. One of the things that they try to do is when with these younger companies, and the same is true for communities, if you don't have a lot to work with in the beginning, let's just focus in on doing the fundamentals really well and sort of getting that flywheel moving. And then if you can get that momentum in place, you can really start to do some amazing things. And success breeds success, right? If you have a few people who are making things happen, it's going to be a lot easier to bring those stakeholders into the fold, and in addition to what Andrea and Colleen already mentioned about maybe giving them a little bit of fluff around their ego, then you'll just be in great shape, to move forward. We've seen that be very successful over the years. And
to kind of piggyback back off of that, something that we usually do when we do a marketing strategy is it's typically a 3-year strategy. And what we show in it is, okay, in year 1, we're going to do these pieces. And then in year 2, they're going to build upon that. So if I want to send out a targeted emailer that's going to link back to my website, I need to make sure my website is good. So maybe year 1 is my website, then year 2 is my emailers. So if you can show how this is a foundational piece for other future pieces, usually you can get that buy-in, especially if one of the future pieces is something one of your stakeholders really wants to do.
Well, and I think that conversation really lends well to when we talk about how do we measure our success. We've mentioned a little bit about analytics, but one of the concepts and kind of terms that we kind of were talking about in preparation was talking about this return on opportunity. Right. And I think that really does kind of encapsulate some of these strategies and approaches. Share with us about how you measure that return on opportunity.
Yeah, so I think that, and this was the term that I brought up during our initial call, I think that the thing that's hard with marketing is it can be difficult to measure return on investment when you are considering investment as projects. So getting a company to come to your community or bringing jobs to your community. I think people want there to be a correlation between I ran an ad, I brought X number of companies. And that isn't always a fair measure because as economic developers, everybody knows that there are a lot of factors that play into a site location decision. And if you're doing talent attraction, there are a lot of factors that play into a hiring decision that have nothing to do with the marketing. So if a site selector, if you're shortlisted for a project and then for whatever reason it just doesn't work out, maybe your transportation assets weren't exactly what they were looking for, or maybe they got better incentives someplace else, that's not the fault of the marketing. And if you do a talent attraction campaign and people apply for jobs that they're not qualified for, or that it doesn't like tickle their fancy and they go somewhere else, again, that's not the fault of the marketing. What you're measuring with marketing is exposure and opportunity. And then these jobs projects or talent attraction is a byproduct of that. So if you put up a lifestyle attraction website with a job board on it, and then you market it, you will get all this traffic to your website, which will eventually bring jobs or fill jobs that you have. And so I think that what you have to think of, instead of saying, I did marketing and I brought X number of companies here, is more, how many people in my target audiences are seeing my message? Am I building relationships with these decision makers? Am I getting more phone calls and emails than I was before? And so I think changing that perspective of, this is really what I'm trying to do, is grow my exposure and get eyes on me. I think if you do need measurable analytics, it's going to be website traffic. It's going to be click through on emails that you send out. So if you send out an emailer that has links back to your website, how many people clicked on those links? How many people forwarded that email to somebody else? How many people opened that email multiple times because maybe they were interested in it? It's going to be, if you run banner ads, how many people have clicked on them? How many people are engaging with your social media content? That's what you're measuring. You're measuring eyes on your marketing. And then eventually the other things that you're trying to accomplish will come as a byproduct of that.
And Ashley, I would just add quickly too, different communities, different groups of stakeholders have different ideas of what success means. So, to Colleen's point, you may have some where just the increased awareness, right? That increased buzz around their identity, and just, how many mentions are they getting out in the media and on social media? That may be a value metric to them that's of relevance. We have some other partners, for example, they really just want numbers. They want to know how many leads converted through on their website, how many increased calls are they getting from these site selectors. So I think it's important to really set expectations from the beginning, and really just take a moment to really define, what does success look like for that individual partner, and then kind of build that in, for whatever seems right for your community, and then keep that expectation front of mind as you go forward, building out whatever the appropriate metrics are.
Yeah, and that was
And if
kind
I
of
could
what I was
just-
talking about with like something being I'm sorry, Andrea, but it's like with something being a byproduct of it. If you have 100 people looking at your website, you may get one phone call out of that, or one project out of that. But if you have 1,000 people looking at your website, or 10,000 people looking at your website because you're actively marketing it, that is naturally going to increase the number of leads that you get, or the number of projects that you get. And so that's really what we're talking about, is just growing that exposure, and that will eventually turn into those measurable things. But it's that first step that you have to sell people on.
Yeah, and I just to kind of, I guess, add to what you've both already said, buzz does mean a lot, right? And so if you've got a community that, maybe you're hosting an event, or you have a company that is visiting, and, they hone in on some of those keywords that you've used in your marketing in the past. I'll just give you an example. So coming from El Paso not too very long ago, El Paso is kind of known as the Sun City, and it's one of the things that we used to use as a marketing tool. And I know that we've talked about maybe, what things you have that are or are not unique that could be marketed. Mm-hmm. Well, we had a community that had over 300 days a year of sunshine. So when you want to relocate someplace that has no weather interruptions, and the whole rest of the country is either on fire or has a hurricane, you can come up with some really interesting and unique things to market. And so when you have a site selector come, or a company come, and that's one of the things that they bring up, I mean, then that they're seeing your marketing, right? So generating that buzz again, kind of the long game, and it might take a while to see that result. But I often found that would be the most effective. So.
Absolutely. Well, you all have shared some really great thoughts and strategies. I know I've been taking notes, but participants, now we want to hear from you. So you'll see kind of popping up on your screen here soon, a breakout room opportunity. And so we'll be doing breakout rooms by community size, but you are welcome to join a room, hop into another room. So we'll have a room for small and or rural communities led by Colleen, mid or suburban communities led by Michelle, and then large and metropolitan communities led by Andrea. We'll have about 20-25 minutes in the breakout rooms. This is an opportunity to ask questions, discuss tactics, and share best practices. But we will all convene back here to kind of share those aha moments and takeaways. We do encourage that when you're in the breakout room, feel free to turn on your camera, unmute your mic. This is your time to engage. We'll see you soon. Breakout sessions was really valuable. Colleen, Michelle, and Andrea, do you mind if we do just kind of a little round robin just to kind of share maybe one or two aha moments or topics of conversation from each of your rooms that was just really exciting or tangible or thoughtful?
Yeah, I can start. Something that I really want everybody to take away from this whole conversation and our breakout session and everything is it's not so much about the marketing pieces that you want to do when you're sitting here saying, here's what I should be doing, or you have presenters at conferences who say, do X, Y, and Z. I think when it comes to selecting which marketing tactics you want to do, one, it's the ones that serve your strategy the best, but I think it's also the ones that you have the time and resources to do really well. I would rather people not have a video than have a bad video. I'd rather people not send out emails than send out bad emails. So when we build websites for people, we always tell them, we can set up social media for you. Are you going to use it? Because if you're not, I would rather you not have it. So I think sitting down and saying, what does my organization realistically have the time and the resources to execute to the best of our ability? And that needs to influence the discussion, not so much, here's the hot tactics that everybody's doing and I want to do them too. Because if you go in and, if I go to your Twitter and the last time you posted was 2019, that looks worse than you just not having a Twitter at all. So I think sometimes that takes a hard look at yourself. And, I personally don't really use social media because it's not a thing I dedicate my time and resources to, and I would rather just not have it. So it takes some internal reflection. It takes a hard look in the mirror of like, what can I actually do? And I think that's something that needs to be taken into consideration.
Our group talked a lot about, regional focus and kind of the larger communities. But I think one of the trends that kind of came across in this conversation is relatable to communities of all size. If you were a small city in a large county or a medium-sized county in a large region, one of your partners is probably doing something really, really well. Mm-hmm. So rather than listen to the pressure that's coming from your board or your council or whomever to do this, whiz bang strategy all out there, all, on your own, your own website, your own brand, your own logo, what can you do to add on to what's already happening at a regional level, at a local level? Like I said, whether you're the small community or the large community, how can you collectively work together for that whole, rising tide, all boats scenario, right? Because if you're in a county and the major asset that you have as a historic downtown, well, obviously the entire county isn't going to be able to, benefit necessarily from that particular asset. But as a collective community, if you allow that area to maybe market that area, or if they're really, really good at, social media strategy, maybe you kind of take a little bit of a back seat and play up on what they're doing. Just let them lead where they're good, and don't try and necessarily reinvent the wheel and compete with one another at a local level.
And I think really briefly to tie into that, if you have an existing regional brand or regional marketing strategy, if you can kind of co-brand with it. A really great example of this is Catawba County, North Carolina, how they've kind of co-branded with Charlotte. The Charlotte region, which is Charlotte and its donut counties, they have a very strong economic development brand. And Catawba basically said, we want to associate ourselves with this existing brand. So choosing similar colors and a similar logo and similar language, not copying it, but when you see them side by side, it's like, oh, these are from the same place. These have the same thing. That's something that you can leverage instead of, like Andrew said, trying to reinvent the wheel.
Complementing, right? Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Quickly, Ashley, from our group, thank you to everyone who bought for our group. One thing that came up a couple of times for us was just websites and frustrations over websites that were legacy sites that maybe were not built well or even not built all the way. And, one thing that we talked about was just the importance of having a really strong website, because it is your face, out to the global community. I think we would all agree, all the panelists probably are all nodding along.
Yep.
Need to have a good website. But, my advice would be just don't give up in frustration, because if you're not a website person, you're probably looking at this thing and feeling totally overwhelmed, but there are lots of ways to approach fixing up a website without having to completely redo the whole thing, whether it's improving on the design aesthetic or the user functionality or the content itself, and making sure that's really aligned appropriately to the right audiences for your community and for your organization's goals, industry, retail, that is. So don't panic, I guess would be my takeaway. A good partner will be able to give you some options for how to approach that and how to, get it where it needs to be without breaking the bank. So there are options out there. And I'll just say again, it is important though to get that piece right, because it really does, it's sort of the foundational piece from which our digital marketing initiatives in particular stems.
Yeah.
Well, it sounds like you guys had awesome conversations in each room. I was able to pop in. And so participants, thank you guys so much for spending your afternoon with us, panelists as well. I hope that each of you found something, even if it's just kind of one nugget, that you're able to take back to your organization and really implement here in this second quarter of the year. Please keep your eyes peeled for an email from SEDC in the next week with a survey and feedback form about this session. As Karen mentioned at the start, this is the first in a 3-part series on special topics that SEDC is rolling out this year. And so we want your feedback so that we can continue to build programming that is customized and tailored to you, our members of SEDC. Again, thanks so much for spending time with us today. We hope you enjoyed the conversation and dialogue as much as we did. Have a wonderful afternoon, and we'll see you back soon.
Thanks,
Bye,
Ashley.
guys.
Bye.
Take care.